Welcome to Feeling Beings Who Think, a podcast project that seeks to find wisdom in conversation through the stories and personal reflections of regular people like you and me. My name is Ariane Rice, and I'm really grateful you're here. So let's get started. I am a pastor. My work has to do with God and souls, immense mysteries that no one has ever seen at any time. But I carry out this work in conditions, place, and time that I see and measure wherever I find myself, whatever time it is. There is no avoiding the conditions. I want to be mindful of the conditions. I want to be as mindful of the conditions as I am of the holy mysteries. End quote. That's an excerpt from the late Eugene Peterson's memoir titled The Pastor. It's a book that has meant a great deal to me, and I was drawn to pull it from my shelf and reread a little of it after my conversation today with Episcopal priest Glenna Huber. Currently, Glenna is the 15th Rector of the Church of the Epiphany in downtown Washington, D.C., and for the past 21 years, she has served in a number of ordained pastoral roles in Baltimore and Atlanta, including ecumenical and educational positions. She is a sought-out lecturer and has addressed subjects ranging from leadership in and outside the church to faith and justice, and how the church can effectively respond to issues that affect where you and I live, our place, and our time. In other words, she is a pastor who is mindful and cares a great deal about the conditions of children, of parents, of people. Because as she shares, the purpose, the draw of religion, my friends, is not primarily an intellectual endeavor. It is relational, and the conditions of our lives are what draw us into that relationship. And the awareness that our lived experiences, our lives are holy. This is not just a conversation for those of us who are involved in the church, however. It's a conversation about the tensions of being a working parent, the love we feel in our relationships, and the heartbreak that is inevitable wherever and whenever there is deep, abiding love. So, whatever the conditions are in your life right now, I hope this conversation is of support, encouragement, and draws you closer towards the mystery of what is holy in your life. Thanks for listening. Hi there, Glenna Huber.
Hello.
It is very good to see you this day.
Thank you. It's fun to have, it's been a day, so I'm excited to be able to see a friendly face.
Nice. Likewise. It is a busy week for you and I, and that has a lot to do with what it is you and I do. So let's get started by you just saying a little bit about, in whatever way you want to, who are you and what do you do?
Well, my name is Glenna Huber. On my what is it? When I had Twitter, I no longer have Twitter, but on my Twitter, when I had a Twitter handle, it said spouse, mother, priest, grace extender. And that's kind of how I experience myself, or some of it is aspirational, because I do hope to extend the amount of grace that I've received in my lifetime. But that's that's who I am. And if someone says, well, because if you go out someplace and someone says, well, what do you do? I said, well, I help people talk about God. I help people frame their language about their relationship with God.
I love that. I love that as a way to talk about what we do. And I love that you just said grace extender, because believe it or not, this morning, I have been reading all about grace.
Ah.
And I was reading about how grace is cooperative.
Mm-hmm.
It was something to do with Thomas Aquinas. And then that got too heady for me and I had to close the book because it was too much. So when you say grace extender, what does that mean?
It means that even though this is a busy week, a friend of mine reached out and said, "Would you be interested in doing a podcast?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. Let's do that." Um, it means that I have a mentee who is about to do his first Christmas service and as an ordained priest. And so we carved out an hour to make sure that I could be present. We could be present with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's a busy week. Yesterday at Epiphany, at the Church of the Epiphany in downtown DC, we host a number of things throughout the course of the week, and someone started a fire in the courtyard, which is not very helpful at all.
No.
And then this morning at 6:45, someone got stuck in the elevator, and the fire department had to come out, which was a phone call to my house. And these things happen, apparently to me. But the primary, all of it is, from my perspective, not worth it if I don't show up.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't show up specifically when people ask.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the point of it if I'm too busy putting out fires and doing elevators? That's not my job. My job is to be present with people.
Right. And so much of what our job isn't necessarily our job, right? I mean, you just explained a lot of things happening in a building. And because you are the priest, there's this expectation that you are responsible for it in some capacity, even if it's just getting the right person there.
Right.
And one of the questions I'm curious to always ask people who have been doing this for a long time, and you've been an ordained priest now for over 2 decades, which, that always just, I'm very impressed with people who stay in it. And, you said, one of the ways you define that is that you help people talk about God. And I'm curious how that has changed for you. If you were to go back and talk to Glenna as she was walking towards ordination over 20 years ago, how was she talking about God? And how does Glenna today talk about God?
Oh, well, that's really fun. That's a fun question to respond to. I have always been curious about people's relationship with God. From the day that Jehovah's Witnesses would come to my house on Saturday mornings and knock on our door, I'm just like, why are you here? What motivates you to get up on a Saturday morning to come to my house and ask me about my relationship with God? Who are you? Mm-hmm. Like, that was really curious to me. And then my mother was ill for an extended amount of time, and I'm from Oklahoma. The best doctors were in Houston, so she moved to Houston to be in hospital, and people would come to our house to pray, and she wasn't even there. So I was like, okay, I need to know more about who this God is, that people feel like if they just pray in space, that's going to reach my mom all the way down in Houston.
Mm-hmm.
And
How
so
old
that
were you?
She was diagnosed when I was like 12. So I think actually in 8th grade, I had a teacher who ended up being ordained he got his MDiv at Yale. And that's when I really got interested, is that because he taught history from a perspective of religion. And then that's when it became a serious interest. Like, I could begin to recognize that people had a relationship with God that was very personal, but also very public. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to know more about that.
So when you were younger than that, did you have any like faith in the household or like church or anything like that?
Sure. I mean, we went to church. We went to any church. We were not beholden to any denomination. We went to the Baptist church on occasion. We went to the Unitarian church on occasion. Our family was a family of organizers, political organizers, and to organize Black people, you need to be in Black church. And so our church as I understood it, our church participation really was about being present so that we could organize for what was needed in North Tulsa. So it wasn't really about religious experience. From my perspective, it wasn't really about religious perspective.
Okay, sorry. So I interrupted that to just hear a little bit more about before you had that history teacher.
Yeah. So, and my mom believed in God. My mom's father, my grandfather, was a Methodist preacher, but I didn't know him very well. He didn't come around too often, and we never went to a Methodist church. So, I just was really curious. And my mom did Bible study with whomever, she had a circle of friends, and they did Bible study every week. But I didn't really participate in that. So by the time I got to college, I was really invested in learning. And when I went to Spelman, I've told this story before, people come around and they knock on your door and they say, do you have a church home? Do you have a relationship with Christ? And I was like, I don't know who you all are. Why are you in my space? And my roommate was Muslim. And so this also created some tension on campus. And just really curious. So for me, it was an intellectual pursuit. And in my 20s, I went off to seminary. And again, it was really an intellectual pursuit. And you can easily slip into that, to religion, theology being an intellectual endeavor.
Yep.
Right. We hear lots of intellectually stimulating sermons from the pulpit, particularly in the Episcopal Church. I can talk to you about Aristotle and existentialism and the eschaton and Augustine. I can do that, but that's not really what draws people to God. And so I had to once I recognized that post-seminary, I was like, okay, I need to understand something a little bit different, because it wasn't Tillich that made people come to my mom's house to pray. It wasn't Tillich that my mother gets down. That didn't motivate her to get down on her knees every day to give thanks to God. So I need to learn some more. So I think how I listen to how people talk about God now is different than how I listened then, because then it was purely intellectual. Now I'm listening for how people, I use words like down in the bowels of your being.
Yeah.
How do you understand God from that perspective? And can you tap into that? Because that's what's sustaining.
Was there an experience as a young adult that shifted? You used the word recognize, when you recognize that it could just be an intellectual, theological pursuit, but that's not what pulls and draws people into that relationship. Was there an experience for you of recognizing that?
I'm not sure, but maybe 9/11. Maybe sitting with people as they've lost loved ones, and those who can enter into that and yell at God and scream, but not leave relationship, versus those who get so angry that they can't be in relationship anymore. I did CPE in a children's hospital in Atlanta. That was probably the turning point for me.
People might not know what CPE stands for. Why don't you explain a little bit?
Right. My clinical pastoral educational unit, I did, and you can choose to do it in a hospital or a prison. I chose to be in a children's hospital.
And what was that? Tell us about it.
Well, I lost a lot of weight because I was sick. It was so hard. It's hard being with sick children. I was very young and didn't have children of my own. It was hard being with parents who were losing their kids, who had children with chronic illnesses. It was really, really, really hard. Because I was so young and I look young, and I am young, they were like, they'd be so mean to me. Get out. We don't need you here. You don't know what you're talking about. And then also to enter into a situation where a woman is just on the ground wailing and they call me as if I know what to do. What do you say to a woman who's about to lose her, 10-year-old child laying on the ground just wailing?
What did you do?
I stood there.
Mm-hmm.
There were no words. There's nothing I could say that was going to make it better. So there was no need for me to say anything.
Is there a curiosity for you, or maybe you've already investigated this? It's curious to me that for somebody who had a mother who was sick, that you as a child, then you would go want to be a CPE chaplain in a hospital with children, or what do you think that connection might be?
Oh, I don't know. I hadn't ever thought about it. My parents were medical. My father was a surgeon. My mother was a registered nurse and a anesthetologist. She's the one who put people to sleep. I have been sort of around hospitals and sick people for my life.
Mm-hmm. Why did you want to work with children? Or what was it about working with children that was interesting?
Oh, and I think that's part of my public narrative right now, is that I believe that children should have the opportunity to be children. And that's what drives my my justice work, because in order for children to be children, we need to have adequate housing for the parents. We need to have adequate employment, adequate food accessibility, adequate safe neighborhoods. And without all of that stuff, children will not have the capacity to be children. And so I strive. That's integral to the work that I do.
Is there a child from that hospital experience that stayed with you?
There were a couple. There's one that died my first night on rounds. He was 12 and riding one of those dirt bikes. It's a four-wheeler, and he was hit by a car. And his mother, I walked into the room and introduced myself as the chaplain and said I came to pray. She yelled at me, and I had to go back and call the supervisor. And the supervisor said, you have to go back down there. And I was like, okay, well, let me figure out how to make this work. So I went into the room where they were working on him. Mm-hmm. What they were doing was keeping him alive until the other parent could arrive. There was nothing I could do. Mm-hmm. But all of those people in that room, there's about 12 nurses and physicians who were working on keeping him breathing until the father got there. Mm-hmm. And they were taking turns, and they would go out into the hall and cry and do recomposure and come back in. And I was like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do right now, is be present as these people do their job and hold their hands while they cry. Mm-hmm. That has stayed with me. We don't always think about the helpers, that the helpers are emotionally, even us, when we do a funeral, I love weddings because I get to be part of an intimate experience of two people joining their lives together. I appreciate funerals, again, because we get to be in an intimate relationship with people that no one else gets to see, but that impacts me as well. If a parishioner dies that I have been in long relationship with, it's not my place to emote all over during the service, but I do have a emotional response. And that was just a lesson for me, to be able to be with those nurses and those physicians and know that I had a role there to help them so that they could continue to do their job.
The word that's coming up for me as you say that story is powerlessness, and sort of the radical invitation to be present in your powerlessness. You can't help the woman who's wailing on the ground. You can't do what the doctors and nurses are doing. And, prayer has a power, and many people would say, does it? What does it do? Because it didn't heal my 12-year-old. And yet it's that, like, showing up, even though there's not necessarily something, quote unquote, to do.
Right.
Was there time in between college and seminary?
No.
So then what was it that happened in college where you were like, I have to get a collar put around my neck as fast as possible?
Oh, I would say that there was one moment where some woman came into my dorm room to tell my roommate that she was going to hell. And I was like, I don't know who you are. I pay for this room, and you can't tell us that we're going to hell. And when you talk about power, that was, again, a turning point for me. I did not have the power or the language to respond adequately to that retort. You're going to go to hell. What are you talking about? How do you know? Did God tell you this? Like, what? I'm very confused. And so I recognize that with the collar comes a certain type of power. I'm also a tiny bit, I don't want to say shy, but I'm not one who's going to just go up and start talking to people about anything unsolicited. So the collar gives me some authority for people to open up and talk to me about God. And I think that's kind of fun. And people do, I sit in the grocery store at random places. They're just like, oh, you're a priest. Well, I stopped believing in God when I was 12. And I'm like, okay, cool. But all of that's interesting.
Well, yeah, because you said this idea of like being drawn to God, and I have the same experience of when I do wear my collar in public, and if people choose to talk to me, 9 times out of 10 is to tell me how they are not religious anymore, right, and then to probably share the story of what it was that caused that to happen.
Yes.
What do you think it is that draws people to do that?
I think they're just conflicted and have never had an opportunity to articulate that conflict. Whatever it is, something happened at a church or in a community, and God was somehow in the midst of it in a real visible way, and people recoiled. But as they grew older or as they became more mature, they weren't able to reconcile that departure with where they want to be now, right? So, a lot of people leave the church after college, and then they come back when they, have kids or get married or whatever. A lot of people leave the church and don't come back, but don't really know why they haven't come back, right? It just became habit not to go. There's also a whole generation of people who did not grow up going to church, but they still have some vague relationship with God, but they just don't know how to reconcile their distrust of the institution with their desire to be in relationship with God. That's a theory.
I find it so interesting. It's really important for them to tell someone that they put in that role as like, you are, a part of that institution, and you're a part of that.
It's typically in a non-threatening environment, right? So I can spill my guts out to this stranger in this non-threatening environment, and maybe they'll give me some type of absolution, and I can go on about my day.
They're still conflicted. There's some resolution that they're looking for. I read Elia Deo. She was talking about how we get it wrong. Most of us leave God when we're really suffering, and that's truly the place when we should be leaning more, because if there's anything God knows about, it's suffering. So what is it about when suffering happens to us that we say, oh, the answer is to abandon God?
Oh, I would just say that's cultural religion, because at least for our generation, maybe it may be different for a different group of folks, but culturally, I grew up with Oral Roberts and Jimmy Swaggart and Tammy Faye, like what we call now prosperity gospel. If you're doing good, then you're getting blessed. And so obviously I must have done something bad, so I'm not receiving the blessings, and I don't know what I did bad. I can't figure it out. So I'm just not going to subscribe to this particular God anymore.
Right. Yeah. The transactional.
Yeah. That's not the God I profess. I don't think our theology supports it, and I don't think the scriptures support that. But if that's what's emanating from the airwaves, that's the popular culture. it's hard to not absorb some of that.
Do you think part of that's what's happening now with the lack of interest and participation in the life of the church?
Oh, I think it's way more than that. I mean, we've got leaders who haven't been taking care of themselves and have ended up being hypocritical and doing things that are destructive, deadly. In the paper this week was the man who was extorting money from his congregation in New York City. There's enough bad apples that have distorted religion in ways that have destroyed people's lives that I think it's hard for people to trust the institution. And so you'll hear more people being spiritual, but not religious.
Well, what do you think the institution does well, and what do you think the institution needs to get a little bit better at?
Oh, well, I don't know that we have time for that on this particular. One, I think the institution by definition is flawed. Humans are inherently flawed. And so the question for me is, what part of this flawed system do I have the capacity to transform with God's help so that more of God's people can be safe in this system? What parts of this system are really, really toxic that need to be excised? And where do I just need to extricate myself from the system altogether, from the institution? Those are things I think about frequently. Becoming part of the church for me was a choice. Choosing to be part of the Episcopal Church was a choice. Knowing that the Episcopal Church at one point in time didn't welcome people who looked like me, who still have challenges with people who look like me, and other people who don't define in the normative, how the church defines normative, hetero, white male picture with the wife and 2.5 children and the white picket fence. It's a challenge. But I think that the only way to change a flawed system is to be part of that system and to know the language of that system and to be in places of authority where you can shift the narrative. And so I see that as part of my role as well in this church.
How do you go about doing that?
Well, anytime I walk into a room, my friend, what you see is a black woman who apparently just speaks her mind. Again, it's just part of who I am. I don't know how to be anything different. So
do you connect the connection between your justice work and your role in the church? And does that bring you into conversation with more people outside the church?
Sure. I think that's one of the things that makes me accessible to those who don't subscribe to Christianity or the Episcopal Church. I'm not in the role of trying to get more Episcopalians. I am, when I'm out in public, I'm sharing the good news of God in Christ through actions, words, and deeds. And part of how I understand God's call to me is making sure that people have access to the things they need in order to be the person that God has called them to be. So I don't see those as separate things. People need water, right, in order to worship. Yeah. How can I praise God if I can't get food, if I don't have access to water, if I don't have access to food, if I don't have access to shelter? That's not what God would want for me. But the world has tried to put me in a position of powerlessness. And somehow, because of the way the world works, I've lived into that system. But God has something better for all of us. And so I understand my role as a priest, as a leader in a prominent downtown parish to help lift those voices.
What are some of the sides of being a priest and a person that are sometimes hard to explain to people? I mean, you talked a little bit about it, I think, when you were saying been in an intimate relationship with a family or a person, and then you have to do their funeral. You have emotions and it impacts you. You don't emote all over the place. And yet likewise similarly experienced this. It's true. It does take a toll. And I don't think we're really that good about acknowledging how much of a toll it can take. We just kind of move on to the next thing. But I will say, one of the reasons I'm having these conversations, and one of the things that people express appreciation for, is hearing priests as people.
Mm-hmm.
And that we are just people, and we're not perfect, and we still have a lot of questions, and we still seek some approval, or I'll speak for myself. And this is a way for me to kind of show a light on the humanity of being a priest, which I wish I could tell my younger self to pay a little more attention to that.
I'm married. I've got 2 kids. I have children who get sick in the middle of the day. This past week, there was a funeral. My oldest had a doctor's appointment, and the doctor was running way late because the power went out. But I had everything scheduled in such a way so that I could be present for the funeral. So I can't change the funeral, and I need to be there. I also need to be present for my child who's at a doctor's appointment. It's not my fault that the doctor's late. And then there's this tension, like, okay, how do I can't be in both places at once. Oh, and it's raining. So that means what was supposed to be 30 minutes is now going to be a 45-minute drive. And okay, do I take the child with me? So maybe he's not going to go to school now because I've got to be at this funeral. And that kind of tension, it happens more frequently than I care to admit. You got to make choices. And sometimes I make choices that prioritize the family, and sometimes I make choices that prioritize the church. And nobody outside of the inner circle knows that actually happens pretty much on a daily basis. Today, the kids are out of school. How much, if the kids come to work with me, I can only work a half day because I don't want them to be, cooped up all day long. And they're great. My kids are great, and they know how to roll with the punches. But it's something that I wrestle with. Am I being a good parent? Are there other parents who, on the last day of school, all these parents had all these little cookies, and they had these little bags that they took to all the teachers. Like, they had a gift bag for every single teacher. And I was like, I'm so glad they had time to do that.
I so relate to being the parent staring at all the other parents. And I relate to having conversations with some of those parents who are literally up till 4 a.m. to be that parent. We're such a wash of this tension, that word tension, and trying to live into all these expectations that we think are outside of us, plus the ones we have inside of us, wanting to excel, right? I mean, I want to be a really good priest for the people I care for, and I want to be a really good parent to my kid.
Yes. I think the other thing that people don't really know, one, is that we do work all week, not just on Sunday.
Right.
And for the most part, we care about them. And there's a lot of people I actually love. And I say to when I do the, a sermon for an installation or something, it's just, this one thing I say is you got to be able to love your people, love the people that you've been in community with. And if you cannot, then you should probably end that relationship and go someplace where you can love folks. Because if you don't love them, it's toxic for you and them. It's hard to take care of yourself anyway. But if you don't love the people, how you don't take care of yourself can actually be more dangerous, right? So I love my people, and there are times where I'm not taking care of myself well, but it's not going to end up, in drug abuse or alcoholism, because I love what I do, and I love the people that I'm doing it for. I'm healthy enough to say, oh, I'm off balance, and I'm going to go on retreat or take a day off or whatever. But when you're filled with hostility because you're making all these sacrifices for these people who, you don't love, you might end up doing some things that are detrimental to self.
I said in another conversation with someone that I just remember one time being in the pulpit in a sermon and looking at everybody and their faces and that quality of love and thinking, and I said to them in the pulpit, like, I wish you could see what I see. from here. And it is weird, this like bird's eye view of a community that you fall in love with. And then you do love these individual people and are so grateful to be brought into their life. Yeah. And then there's a lot of challenges too. There's a lot of challenges. It's not all rosy. I shouldn't say it.
Right. But you don't leave your house at 9:00 to go to the hospital for people you don't love. Right. You don't answer the phone at 6:30 in the morning because somebody's stuck in the elevator.
Yeah.
If you don't care. And also my family has to recognize that I care, and they don't always. I think that's something else parishioners don't understand. They don't love the same way we do.
No.
And there's some jealousy and some resentment on occasion. Like, what does it mean to have Christmas on a Sunday morning? Obviously, I'm having church because it's Sunday. Everybody knows that, right? Mm-hmm. It just happens to be Christmas, but Jesus is being born. So no, I'm not going to stay home while we open gifts. And I know that you all are angry about that, and I'll be back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the New York Times had an article last week or so about all the churches, particularly in the Protestant. And, I know we're both but who are not having Christmas services on Sunday because it's Christmas morning.
Right. But it's also
Sunday.
Yeah.
I know. There's one thing I like about the Catholic small c being an Episcopal church is that structured of, I don't have to think about it. I don't have to choose the readings. I don't have to choose when the church is open. These are just the rules.
Yes. Yeah. My new seminary, my mentee was like, yeah, it's Sunday. And I said, yep. And you will have church because the canons indicate that on Sunday is our principal feast day. Mm-hmm. He was like, oh, okay.
So this will be in the world in 2023. And I am definitely curious to know what is bringing you joy in anticipation of a new year.
Honestly, what's giving me joy right now is just watching my kids. Mm. My oldest is about to be 10 and my other one will be 8 in April. So they're Christmas, Easter babies. They're becoming their own people, and one is interested in ice hockey, and I'm like, am I going to be an ice hockey parent? Okay, that's curious. The other one yesterday got upset with me because I have not enrolled her in ballet classes. You said you were going to enroll me. Every time I talk to you about ballet, you tell me about when you were ballet, but you haven't. I want to take classes. I'm like, okay, I hear you. I hear you. So they're becoming their own people. I've been in my congregation long enough that I have time to really sort of figure out how to be present for them as they explore these new interests. And that's going to be fun for me. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm always looking forward to spring and summer. This is not my favorite time of the year. It's 30 outside. That's horrendous.
I know.
In terms of my church, I feel like I'm ahead of my time in many ways, but I'm going to get them started on a process. We've been working on a process of sustainability. And as I'm a visionary, and as I'm visioning 10 to 20 years out. And what is it that the church is going to look like 10, 20 years from now? And what seeds does Epiphany need to plant in order to be sustainable in 20 years? Mm-hmm. And I think I've got some of the congregation now thinking that way, mm-hmm. and able to respond to that vision. So we'll see if that actually happens. But I feel like we're beginning to move. It took a long time. I'd say, okay, we had a consultant. And they were like, all right, well, what do you want Epiphany to look like in 10 years? And they were like, 10 years? Are we still going to be here in 10 years? Yes. What do you want it to look like in 10 years? Well, we can't think about 10 years. We got to make the budget now. Accurate. But once we make the budget for now, what do you think 10 years is going to look like? And now they're able to think like that. In 10 years, 5 years, we're going to be able to do this. And in 10 years, we will have achieved this. And so what we need to do now, and I'm like, yes. So I'm looking forward to really seeing if we can move the needle on the work that we've been doing for about 3.5 years.
Well, that's the gift of being in love with people. In all sorts of relationships, right? You get to create something together. You get to be a part of a new thing that you're creating. Children, a household, a congregation that's still around in 10 to 20 years.
Yeah. It's definitely going to look different, but it'll be here.
Mm-hmm.
This particular church has been around 185 years. I'm not going to be the one to close it or destroy it. It'll keep going.
Yes, I know. That's the one thing I'm grateful for too, is I think we get a good dose on a regular basis of a God's eye view of time, both from studying scripture, from being part of a tradition that's been 2,000 years, and then even our particular tradition in these communities that have lasted. Mine's 100+ years old. Yours is almost 200 years old. That's something.
Yeah.
That's people showing up.
We're really just a blip on the screen.
Yeah.
For this. I don't take myself too seriously. That's what I'm learning, not to take it too seriously.
Well, thanks for being both serious and not too serious, and joining me and sharing a little bit about you and your world in the new year.
My pleasure.
All right. Talk to you next time.
All righty.